Hi there and welcome back to my channel. This is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing Death of a Nag, written by MC Beaton. It's a cozy mystery. It's book 11 in the Hamish Macbeth series, a very long running series by this author. I really enjoyed this story. It takes Hamish away from his home turf, his home village, for much of this story. And I don't usually like that in cozy mysteries, but in this book it works. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. It works in this book because the new setting and the new characters are very well told. If they weren't well told, if the setting was poorly described, if the characters didn't work, I wouldn't enjoy this book that much at all. But everything seems to fit in this story. Hamish goes out of his own comfort zone and is embroiled in another investigation, of course, in this book, and those new characters add so much. So for this book, it was enjoyable. But be warned, there is a sad moment in this story, quite sad. We lose a regular character from the whole cast in this book. I'm not going to tell you who it is. If you want to read it, you'll find out. But it is a very sad moment, and it's a very emotional moment in this story as well. Not just for Hamish, but for other people in the story. And as a reader, it's quite emotional as well, because that character is just a character that adds so much into these stories. And it's not a character that makes a huge impact a number of pages, but it's a character that just adds a lot into this story for who that character is. At the start of this story, Hamish needs a holiday for two reasons. He's broken off his engagement with Priscilla, and then he's been demoted back to constable. The reason he's demoted is because in the previous story, he found a body in a peat bog, and he used that body to accuse somebody of murder. But turns out that body was a Pictus man, and the body was dated centuries ago. So when that was found out, the police force were embarrassed, and they demoted Hamish because of it. So Hamish is feeling quite down in the dumps, and he decides to go on holiday to a place called Skag. And in this book, it's described that many people wouldn't usually go to Skag for holiday. That's the feeling I get anyway. But Hamish goes there because it's a cheap holiday. He finds a cheap establishment to stay on this holiday. And we get the impression through MC Beaton that the Scottish Highland people are always looking for the cheap deal, the cheap option. That's the impression we get in this story. I don't know if that's true or not. I can only believe MC Beaton's version of that, but that's what happens in this story anyway. When Hamish goes to this establishment for his holiday, it's kind of like a B&B, but it's a very kind of run-down version of a B&B. The new management, they're very cheap. Everything's on the cheap. The food's awful. There's not a great service going on in this establishment, and Hamish is quite fed up with it very quickly. And the other guests at this place as well, some of them are quite odd. There's a great mix of characters who are staying there with Hamish during this time. Some are annoying, of course, because we have those annoying people in all these stories. Some are interesting, very intriguing. Some stand out for different reasons. I'm not going to go into great detail on all of them. But of course, we have one character in this book, and this character is staying at this place where Hamish is staying. He's very loud, obnoxious. He rubs people up the wrong way, and he's a character that most people don't like. And of course, he's the murder victim in this book. And that's how it plays out in this story. It's a regular trope in some cozy mysteries, and in this series especially, where the character that gets a lot of people offside, makes a lot of enemies, becomes the murder victim. Because it opens up a whole range of suspects and just makes that whole suspect pool so much richer and keeps you guessing about who the culprit is. That's the whole setup for this story. I'm not going to go into any more in the plot. We just have Hamish on holiday, out of his comfort zone, away from his regular beat, and somebody where he's staying is murdered. The police force in Skag, where the murder takes place, they're aware of Hamish. They know he has a knack of solving crimes, so they make use of him. They ask him to stay at the establishment with these people and try to dig in and get clues and talk to them and try to find out who the culprit is. Hamish doesn't want to, because as time progresses in this story, he just becomes less and less interested in getting to know these people. Some of them are quite awful people. Some of them are just a bit strange in his view. But he's forced to stay there, he thinks anyway, to help out the police force in Skag. And we get the impression that they want him to help out and they're going to take all the glory. You get that impression in this story. But the book in general the mystery itself. I really enjoyed the mystery in this book. It's very well done, very clever, very strong mystery. There are many red herrings, many suspects, a lot going on in the book as well in this mystery. So the way it unfolds for Hamish when he's investigating, I enjoyed that as well. So it's very strong, and I just loved the whole mystery in this book. The characters in this book are very well created. All those new characters feel very rich, and I find in many MC Beaton books, they're not very long books, but she has a way of creating characters in these books that have great histories, they're well-rounded, that you can picture them, you can understand them. A lot of the characters get based on stereotypes, of course, and you find that in this series, but the way they're created and they're injected with humour and wit and some cynicism and different elements going about in these characters, they all feel so real because they're not just one thing. The characters can surprise you in this book and in this series. You think one thing of them and then suddenly that kind of changes because something else gets added to them. So all the characters have many facets, and I found that fascinating in this book and in the series in general. I don't know how MC Beaton is able to create characters that are often based on stereotypes, but also feel very real, very well-rounded, and sometimes quite unique. So I'm not sure how that happens, but it's an interesting balance. But MC Beaton can do it, and do it very well. And the setting of this story, despite it being mostly set in Skag, rather than Hamish's home village, I enjoyed the setting. That's down to how it's described. I can picture it. And in some ways it feels picturesque, in some ways it feels a bit kind of grey and almost run down. I like the whole description of the setting where Hamish is staying on holiday, the way it's described about the food and the managers and the atmosphere in that place as well, and how it impacts upon the characters in this story. All that just plays out and adds so much to the overall setting and atmosphere in general in this story. So I enjoyed that very much. I thought it was very well done, very carefully done, and I think it was just well plotted and well constructed. And I get the impression that MC Beaton is basing this on a real place called Skag. I don't know for sure, but I think MC Beaton has done a marvellous job in creating this whole setting in this story. Maggie is interesting as a character in this story. She's on the police force in Skag. She wants to advance in the police force, but with her character I get the impression she lacks compassion, lacks patience, and I wonder if that impedes her ability to proceed in the police force. I'm not sure, but I got that impression about her character in this book. Also, I just get the impression she hasn't worked out that balance of what she needs to do to advance in the police force. And I get the impression that MC Beaton may have been not very kind to the character in the story sometimes, but she's interesting as a character because of the way her whole character makeup is created in the book. Those sort of different elements to her make her stand out a bit in the story, I think. And I'm wondering as a character if we'll see more of Maggie in the future, because you get that impression as well, because a lot of pages are devoted to her in this story. She's in the story quite a lot, and she even goes to Hamish's home village a couple of times with Hamish. So because of that, you get the impression that she may appear in later books in this series. Deacon is the officer in charge of the investigation in Skag. It's interesting because he's the opposite to Blair. Where Blair shouts at people and bullies people, Deacon doesn't shout. He seems to plod along. He seems a little bit more patient as well. And it's an interesting contrast between Blair and this character called Deacon. I liked him in the story. I thought he was interesting. I thought he added a different kind of element to the story we haven't seen before. This superior kind of officer who Hamish reports to for this book. But Deacon is patient. He seems a bit more relaxed. He seems, a bit more willing to talk to people and not bully them. But he seems to plod along at his own pace and get to the truth in the end. So I like that in this story. I like the fact that it adds just a different element, a different contrast to the story. Cheryl and Tracy I'll mention together because MC Beaton has created them in the same way. They're based on a stereotype, but on the extreme version of a stereotype, which MC Beaton does sometimes in her series. They're written as being loud and abrasive and trashy. They're written as being quite coarse sometimes and quite rude, and MC Beaton does that to big effect. They're also in there for comic relief purposes in the story. That happens a few times in this book. But as characters go, they do make an impact. They burst from the page. I think they're very important to this story. I think if you remove them from the story, some of that kind of comic relief element, some of that different colour in the story would be removed. And it would just, I think, make the book seem a bit more flat as well. So I think as characters go, they're well created, well described, and make a big impact in this story. I really enjoyed Death of a Nag. For me, one of the best in the series so far. I rate it a 5 out of 5. There's so much to like about this story. The mystery is very strong, the setting and characters are very strong. Hamish himself feels very strong in this story. It feels like he's changed a little bit in the story from previous books in this series even, so I enjoyed that very much in this book. A great book in this series. As I go through each book in this series, I'll do a book review for each book and put that video up on my channel. If you don't want to miss out on those videos, check out my channel and subscribe. On the screen now is a Hamish Macbeth playlist. It includes all the videos so far for this series. Check them all out now.